Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this, the latest European Parliamentary Research Service online policy roundtable. I'm Anthony Teasdale from the EPRS, and I'm delighted to see so many people already online for what promises to be hopefully both a very topical and a very stimulating discussion, obviously in very concerning circumstances. The topic of our roundtable today: Russia's war on Ukraine, policy implications for Europe both today and tomorrow. In effect, the recent events that dramatically transformed the fate of the European continent are ones that you're not expecting me to dwell on in any detail, but suffice to say that for the European Union, they have huge implications. They have implications in terms of security, defense, foreign policy. They have implications in terms of refugees. They have implications in terms of energy supply, food supply, raw materials. They have huge implications in terms of Europe's place in the world. And so to discuss these and many other dimensions that are emerging on a daily basis, we put together a panel of, on the one hand, practitioners and think tankers, and on the others, analysts from within the European Parliament itself who are going to share their initial thinking. The event will take a couple of hours. We're making it slightly longer than normal so that there's plenty of opportunity for everybody who's on the panel to express their views, but also for everybody who's following, and now we're almost 170 people already, to pose questions or make comments from the digital floor. And of course, we will try to take as many of those as possible in the Q&A discussion. That discussion will be moderated by my colleague Etienne Bassot, Director of the Members Research Service within EPRS. The panel itself comprises three individuals who, from different Brussels perspectives outside the European Parliament, have been thinking and reflecting about the implications of recent events. Jakob von Kierkegaard, Senior Fellow at the German Marshall Fund and also the Paton Institute, and a leading economic commentator. Daniela Schwarzer, Executive Director for Europe and Eurasia in the Open Society Foundations and a Fellow of the Harvard Kennedy School. And Richard Tibbles, Head of Division for the Eastern Partnership and Bilateral Relations in the European External Action Service, so very much in the eye of the storm. And from within EPRS, we have three policy analysts: Susanna Angel, policy analyst in the European Council Oversight Unit, which monitors what's going on at the level of heads of state and government. Lasse Berm, the head of the Economic Policies Unit, which covers the whole range of major economic committees in the European Parliament, nearly all of which are very directly affected by recent events. And Elena Lazarou, who's the acting head of our External Policies Unit in the Members Research Service here in the EPRS, and is also a visiting fellow at Chatham House in London. But to set the scene and to reflect upon the geopolitical implications of what's now happening, we are delighted that we are being joined this lunchtime by David McAllister. David McAllister is, of course, chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament, also of the EU-UK Coordination Group within the Parliament. He's been a member of the Parliament since 2014, having previously served as Minister President of Niedersachsen in Germany. We're delighted, David, that you're sparing the time in what I know is an extremely busy and demanding moment in the political life of the Parliament and of the Union, to share your thoughts, to give some keynote remarks effectively about the significance of what's happening on the ground now, what's happening more widely across Europe, and how Russia's war on the Ukraine is going to affect the European Union today and tomorrow. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm very glad to kick off this event, and I will be carefully listening to what the panelists have to tell us. I would like to briefly sum up what the European Union has done since the beginning of this war of aggression and what impact this will have short-term, mid-term and long-term for a number of European policies. And of course, I'm saying this as the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. We have spent hours discussing all these matters in recent weeks, so I think I can give quite a good overview. Now, we all know that this 24th of February has changed everything We all woke up in a different world, and memories of last century's darkest pages are being brought back daily on our TV screens. The reaction of the European Union, the United States, the United Kingdom, and like-minded partners and allies has been immediate, it has been united, and it has been determined. The Russian aggression has not weakened and divided us, but from my point of view, made us stronger and more united in our goal to safeguard peace, security, democracy, and freedom in Europe. Our reaction as European Union has been twofold. We have adopted an unprecedented package of individual and sectorial economic sanctions that affect the energy, transport, and technology sectors, as well as our visa policy. Our goal is to make Russia pay a very high price for its reckless actions. And at the same time, we are providing Ukraine with exceptional military, economic, and humanitarian assistance. The restrictive measures of the EU now apply to a total of almost 900 individuals, including the Russian president, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, oligarchs, prominent businessmen, and members of the Russian Federation Council, and more than 60 entities. The package of our economic sanctions, and there have been 4 packages, target 70% of the Russian banking sector and key state-owned companies. An export ban in the energy sector aims to hit the Russian hydrocarbon sector, and particularly oil refineries. And meanwhile, in the technology sector, sanctions here are expected to hinder Russian developments in defense and security sectors. In parallel, sanctions in the transport sector aim at speeding up the degradation of the country's connectivity. The scale and the horrific consequences of the Russian aggression required an extraordinary response also from the point of view of military assistance. Of course, here you have to name that for the first time the European Union has mobilized 500 million euros from the European Peace Facility to finance the purchase and delivery of weapons to Ukraine and other equipment. Additional 500 million euros have been also agreed by the Council this week. As the war will go on, it is inevitable that the Ukrainian armed forces needs will increase, and therefore our support should match their demands. In this respect, and also in the light of the recent Russian attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure, it is crucial that we create and maintain fully operational and efficient supply chains. European, American, and international financial institutions are steadily increasing their economic support to Ukraine. The IMF has just approved an emergency financing of $1.4 billion US. The first 2 tranches of the EU macro-financial assistance package announced by the Commission in January have already been delivered, and I hope that they will keep the Ukrainian government afloat. The Russian invasion has triggered a massive humanitarian crisis, especially along our Eastern European borders, and over 3 million Ukrainians have already fled the country, and we expect the numbers to rise quickly. This is the fastest growing refugee crisis in the world. The European institutions are deploying enormous resources in coordinating efforts to assist EU member states, especially Poland, Hungary, Romania, Slovenia, the Czech Republic, and our partner Moldova, in this very difficult moment. The EU Civil Protection Mechanism has been activated and is being particularly useful because it makes use of the Ukrainian government's capabilities, which are still significant despite the war. The Commission is also working on guidance on the temporary protection regime to safeguard minors and prevent human trafficking at the border. The European Commission has mobilized 105 million euros for emergency assistance. So we are doing a lot trying to support Ukraine financially, economically, military-wise, and of course, in dealing with this humanitarian tragedy. But the war in Ukraine has also undoubtedly been a wake-up call for all of us and is a defining event for our future policy. I believe that decisive steps are needed to build our European sovereignty, reducing our dependencies, and designing a new growth and investment model for the future. If you look at the Versailles Declaration 2 weeks ago, the heads of government mentioned 3 dimensions. First, bolstering our defense capabilities. Second, reducing our energy dependencies. And third, building a more robust economic base. We are in the middle of a paradigm shift. The decision in Denmark to hold a referendum about joining the EU's defense and security policy early June. Germany, Sweden, Denmark, Spain, and Romania's new commitments towards military spending. The open debates about deepening relations with NATO or even joining NATO in Finland and Sweden demonstrate, and these are just a number of examples, that for all our member states, the war in Ukraine has meant that security and defense policy have become more vital. The 27 heads of government and state declared in Versailles that they call for a generalized increase in defense expenditures, with a significant share for investment, including in the capabilities necessary to conduct a full range of missions and operations. Hopefully, they will actually implement their promises now. I believe that on the European side, we need to provide real added value to existing NATO capabilities. I believe one example is that we protect ourselves against hybrid warfare by strengthening our cyber resilience, protecting our infrastructure, and fighting disinformation. The European Defence Fund is, next to the European Peace Facility, an important pillar of our future defence policy. Already before the start of the war, the Commission allocated in a budget close to 8 billion euros until 2027. This is a giant leap in supporting collaborative defence research and development projects meeting EU armed forces operational needs. This week has been marked by the adoption of the Strategic Compass. Josep Borrell was in the Foreign Affairs Committee yesterday afternoon presenting the details. I would welcome the Strategic Compass. It allows the European Union to develop its autonomy in security and defence matters, strengthening its capacity to act credibly as a strategic partner, and defending an international system based on rules and multilateral cooperation. But I do also believe that we now have enough strategies that have been written. We have enough strategies that have been presented. We need to get serious now on the implementation. And that's why we need to take concrete actions, establishing the European Defence Union, which is necessary to provide stability in our neighbourhood and to defend ourselves. Apart from defence, let me also mention that we need to also thoroughly reassess other policy fields in the EU, for instance, energy security. We need to phase out our dependency on Russian gas, oil, and coal imports as soon as possible, something Parliament, by the way, advocated repeatedly in the past. Finally, the Commission will prepare a detailed action plan by May, and it already published the outline of its strategy to make Europe independent from Russian fossil fuels well before 2030, starting with gas in light of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And finally, in parallel, we need to reinforce Europe's economic base. We need to become more resilient, competitive, and fit for the green and digital transitions. And that's why I firmly believe that in order to do so, we need to reduce our strategic dependencies, particularly in the most sensitive areas, such as critical raw materials, semiconductors, medicines, digital technologies, and food. So to conclude, the Versailles Declaration made it clear, quote, Russia's war of aggression constitutes a tectonic shift in European history, unquote. Indeed, the return of war in Europe, as well as all the major geopolitical challenges linked to it, are challenging our ability to promote our vision and defend our interests. These are exceptional times, and we need to now show exceptional resolve, determination, and leadership if we want to preserve our fundamental values and our open democratic way of life. And this is what I hope European leaders at the European Council and our transatlantic partners at the NATO summit will consider. We need to show determination, and we need to keep our unity in these exceptional times where we need to show exceptional resolve. Looking forward now to the panel debate. Anthony, once again, you've gathered very interesting panelists, and I hope that we can also benefit in the European Parliament from the results of today's debate. Thank you very much.
Well, very many thanks, David, for not only the very broad-ranging character, but the inspiring nature of those remarks, which I think set the scene perfectly for the panel discussion that will now follow. I'm going to hand the baton over to Etienne Bassot, who's going to moderate that discussion. But before I do so, just like to mention to the over 230 people who are now online that there will be an opportunity at the end of the interventions by the panelists for you to ask questions and make comments from the digital floor. Please signal your desire to do so in the Q&A function, and assuming you would like to be, we will read out or give you directly the opportunity to come in with those comments, and bear with us if there are any technical delays or otherwise in picking up the fact that you're expressing interest in so intervening. I'd like also to draw the attention of all the colleagues and others online to the fact that the EPRS has produced and is continuing to produce a whole series of publications relating to the war on Ukraine. We have about a dozen so far, and that these provide snapshots, if you like, of the situation as it's evolving in all of these different dimensions, taking not only the human and military aspects of this, but the policy, current and future policy implications, one by one, in some detail. And like other EPRS events of this kind, we normally do about one a week. Next week, we're doing a book talk at lunchtime next Wednesday on the language of politics. It'll be available on YouTube subsequently for people to watch as they wish in due course. Thank you very much once again, David. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for staying with us. And over to Etienne.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Anthony and David, for the introduction. And thank you particularly to you, David, for taking the time in such an extremely busy week to be with us for a while, even if you cannot maybe stay until the very end. I think you have highlighted the response of the EU so far to the war of Russia against Ukraine, but also to the human tragedy we are living. And you have also sketched the what is next, and namely what we should do next, and mentioning the Versailles agenda or the Versailles roadmap. And I'm sure that the points that you presented will generate discussions among panelists. Let us come now to our panel discussion. I'd like to welcome the guest speakers and welcome also our virtual audience, which is rising over time. You will have the opportunity to put questions, so use already the opportunity to make these questions in the Q&A or chat functions for that purpose, and we'll take them afterwards. We have 6 speakers today, and I will introduce them one by one, starting with Richard Tribbles. Richard is the head of the Eastern Partnership Bilateral Relations Division of the European External Action Service. Before that, Richard, you worked, among many things, on transatlantic relations and on Eastern Partnership. There is a lot going on which you could comment on: sanctions against Russia, support to Ukraine and Ukrainians, strategic compass, what's going to happen tomorrow in the European Council. So over to you, Richard.
Thank you very much indeed, Etienne. Good afternoon, everyone. I have to say that Mr. McAllister has much more eloquently than I could have done covered some of the points I wanted to mention. Let me try and give an EAS perspective on the response of the EU to Russia's invasion. Let me emphasize to start with that Russia has clearly challenged not just Ukraine, not just Europe, but the whole international rules-based order, and that this is therefore a war which is of direct consequence to every member state of the United Nations. And that is why I think that 141 members of the United Nations signed up to the UN General Assembly resolution of the 2nd of March condemning Russia's aggression against Ukraine, and why only 4 countries sided with Russia in that vote. And then subsequently to that, we have seen on the 16th of March, the International Court of Justice order the Russian Federation to immediately suspend military operations in the territory of Ukraine and to debunk effectively Russia's accusation that it was waging a war to prevent alleged genocide in Ukraine. And as Mr. McAllister has said, the reaction of the EU and our like-minded partners has been robust, quick, and united. And let me lay out now how I see the EU response in 3 directions. Firstly, a diplomatic direction. Secondly, sanctions. And thirdly, the whole range of support to Ukraine that we've been engaged in over the past weeks. As I said, the UN General Assembly vote was very, very exemplary of the unity of the international community against Russia's invasion. That was followed up by a vote in the UN Human Rights Council, and there are further resolutions expected today. But I think what we see from the External Action Service side is that the battle still needs to be fought to convince our partners around the world that Russia's invasion is a clear violation of international law and must be combated. So our delegations around the world, in conjunction with EU member states' embassies, are working flat out to convey that message to all partners. And the EU-China summit on the 1st of April, for example, will be one occasion when we convey our point of view to China at the highest level. Another key part of the diplomatic track is the collection of evidence of war crimes, since it is quite clear for anyone who has been paying the slightest attention over recent weeks that some really egregious violations of human rights have taken place, violations of international humanitarian law. And therefore, we're extremely pleased that the International Criminal Court, as well as some EU member states, have opened investigations into war crimes. From the EU side, we are helping to ensure coordination by mapping the various initiatives that are being taken in this field, and also taking part in how to support the gathering and preservation of evidence of such violations. It's obviously vital that there should be no impunity for these war crimes. Let me say also with regard to Russia that we have seen a very, very intense crackdown on civil society, on dissenting voices of all kinds in Russia, and certainly part of our effort will be to support independent media, journalists, and civil society who are speaking up against the war from wherever they may be found. We have seen as well a massive disinformation campaign conducted by the Kremlin, which does have an impact on how countries further away from Europe see the war, and that therefore our resources, both at the EU level, national level, and with our like-minded partners, are very firmly devoted to debunking the massive amount of information that is being put out into the media. Mr. McAllister has referred to the sanctions track, so I won't go into that in too much detail, but just to say that this is an extremely far-reaching and hard-hitting sanctions package, and it is clear that the EU remains ready to go further should that be necessary, which it most probably will be. And let me say also that we have included sanctions against Belarus as part of our response, given the logistic facilities that Lukashenko's regime has provided the Russian armed forces on the territory of Belarus. In the G7 context, Russian products and companies have been denied most favored nation treatment in the EU market and other key markets, and 14 WTO members have revoked this status from Russia. We recognize that the war is having an impact on third countries, given the importance notably of Ukraine and Russia in the grain market in particular. Our sanctions on the EU side are not targeted against food production, and the shortages are caused solely by Russia's invasion. And that's a message that we will continue to pass to our partners around the world. In terms of support for Ukraine, we have done a lot. We've done it very fast and displayed a great deal of unity in doing so. Mr. McAllister mentioned the support for the Ukrainian armed forces in defending Ukraine's territorial integrity and supporting the civilian population through the European Peace Facility. The Foreign Affairs Council on Monday reached a political agreement to double our support to 1 billion euros, and the EU is coordinating that military support given by member states with Ukraine. The delivery of lethal equipment, which I think would have been unthinkable before the war, and it shows, I think, how quickly things have moved on due to the gravity of the invasion that Mr. Putin has launched. And obviously, the importance of the provision of military equipment is clear for all to see. The more Ukraine and its people are able to resist and show resilience, the better chances they will have in securing a settlement on its terms, not Mr. Putin's terms. Financial assistance has obviously also been provided by the EU, 1.2 billion euros in macro financial assistance and emergency and humanitarian assistance. And the European Investment Bank is also redirecting loans. Our ongoing support is being repurposed to deal with the immediate needs of Ukrainians on the ground. And let me also mention that we are paying particular attention to the field of cyber security. An allocation of 10 million euros has been provided to shore up Ukraine's cyber security at this very, very sensitive moment. Let me make particular reference to the synchronization of the Ukrainian and Moldovan electricity grids with the continental European grid. This was always on the cards as part of the bringing Ukraine and Moldova closer to the EU, but this has successfully been advanced, and now we hope that this measure will keep Ukraine's electricity system stable and enhance its long-term energy security. The humanitarian situation is obviously dire. We've all seen the terrible images from the city of Mariupol. We are now seeing the worst refugee crisis since the Second World War. 1/4 of the Ukrainian population has now been displaced, either within the country or in other countries in Europe. And obviously the solidarity shown by the EU and its member states is extremely good. The temporary protection mechanism is indeed now established and providing support. And let me finally mention consular cooperation. The EU and the EAS has helped ensure that those citizens of the European Union who wanted to leave Ukraine have been able to leave Ukraine since the war started. And then just in closing, looking forward, I think the Versailles Declaration is the roadmap for the future. Let me highlight 5 things. Firstly, reconstruction. There is a strong commitment from the EU to play a leading role in reconstruction efforts in Ukraine after the war. Secondly, reference was made to the accession application of Ukraine, and as you know, the Council has swiftly requested an opinion from the Commission on Ukraine's accession application, along with the accession applications of Moldova and Georgia as well. And then indeed the 3 fields that we collectively as the EU are going to be focusing on now, I think more and more in the future, are indeed how can we ensure a much higher degree of energy security, wean us off Russia's resources. Secondly, how can we design an economy for the future where we can stand on our own 2 feet, shall we say? And thirdly, enhance our defence efforts still further with the very positive development of the agreement of the strategic compass also happening this week. So I'll stop there, and obviously happy to delve into other things in more details in the question and answer session. Thanks very much, Etienne.
Thank you very much, Richard, for this very comprehensive presentation. Let us move immediately to our second speaker, and let us move to Berlin, to Daniela Schwarzer. Daniela, you are currently Executive Director for Europe and Eurasia at the Open Society Foundation. You are also Honorary Professor of Political Science at the Freie Universität Berlin and a Senior Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center. To accomplish the ambitious road map that Richard was describing, we need the member states on board, and among them we need Germany. I think it's extraordinary to highlight that there has been this shift or this Zeitenwende in Germany that was announced by Chancellor Scholz to raise defense expenditure to 2% of GDP. I think it's a true change in German history and policy. But there are also other issues that are open, namely the question of gas that is also heavily debated in the public scene. And I would be interested to know what you think about this. I'd like also to mention that President Metsola was yesterday in Berlin, and she said, we cannot afford anymore to be dependent on Russian energy imports. So I would be very interested to hear your assessment on this and on other elements that you would like to bring into the discussion. Over to you, Daniela.
Thank you very much, Etienne. It's a great pleasure to be with you, and I'm very honored to be part of this panel. A lot has changed in Germany, and yet I would say that the Zeitenwende, so this fundamental shift that you have mentioned, Etienne, is not so much in Germany, but it's really in our geopolitical context. And what we see are first political reactions to it. I'll comment on them briefly, but then also lay out what I think has to happen beyond what we have already seen. Now, you mentioned that the German government has announced to step up its defense spending. It has taken long-awaited decisions on Nord Stream 2, the new additional gas pipeline that was to be opened very soon, connecting Russia and Germany. And Germany has brushed away a taboo with regards to arms deliveries that we don't usually deliver arms into conflict zones. So these 3 elements were at the heart of decisions taken 2 weeks ago, and they were all drawn together in a major speech that the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz gave to the Bundestag in a special session on a weekend. Now, essentially, all of these changes represent a fundamental shift in Germany's approach towards Russia. So for very long, consecutive German governments thought that engagement with Russia, including energy imports, are actually a way to improve relationships with Russia and not only create mutual dependencies, but also to always keep channel of communication and conversation open. This has worked for a number of years, but I do think that for a too long time, the actual threat that Russia represents to our eastern neighbors and to the EU as a whole was really underestimated in Germany. And right now, there are very many debates in Germany about what could we have known, why didn't we know it, and so on. And I think what we have to learn from this is really that when authoritarian leaders lay out their strategies, as Vladimir Putin did after the annexation of Crimea, and then in consecutive contributions, including last summer, where he gave his vision really of what Russia is and what Russian territory is, and this very sort of cultural, in a way, nationalistic discourse, it's all there. And while in the think tank community in Germany, there were quite a few who pointed towards that threat, the worst case scenario wasn't taken seriously enough. So now we see a very clear adjustment of policies. And you raised the question about gas and oil imports. Right now, there is a very serious debate, in particular, in a short-term perspective, but also in a medium to long-term perspective. The government announced that it wants to put Germany into a situation where it doesn't rely on fossil energy imports anymore. So this is a declared objective. However, the question is when, and can this be used as an additional way of sanctioning Russia in the very short term? And this is where the debate currently sits. There are more and more people, including members of parliament, who actually argue that Germany should stop imports now in order to not fund Putin's war on Ukraine. Roughly 600 million euros are paid every day. So we are in the middle of this debate. Obviously, replacement of that energy import is a crucial issue. The Minister of the Economy and Climate Transition traveled to Qatar on the weekend to strike a deal there. So you see things moving very quickly. What we need to take into account is how public opinion looks at this change. Because I think, if the scenario is that the war continues, very unfortunately, with all its atrocities, then the response will have to continue and will have to be escalated. Right now, public support for this policy shift, which we saw 2 weeks ago, is substantial. So there's a lot of backing. There is a readiness right now in opinion poll data, people who say, we assume costs that these policies will bring, but the bill hasn't arrived yet. So I think that we have to be cautious, and not only for Germany, but for the EU as a whole, to look at the costs of the sanctions, at the costs that the major two transition agendas that Germany and Europe are going through, climate transition and digital transition, will have, and not only in only monetary terms, but also in terms of social change that this brings about, and an adaptation of daily lives to new realities. So I think a lot of attention politically needs to be paid to the social and societal dimension of this current situation in order to keep up the backing for policies that are at the moment very determined vis-a-vis Russia and very pro-European and integrative in their general outlook. So while I think in the short term the response is a good one, we have to think the next steps and make sure that the domestic underpinning of these policies is solid. And again, not only in Germany, Germany has a huge role as being among the richest countries in the European Union to watch how all of this plays out in the EU 27 and in our neighboring countries. And I think the example given by Richard Tibbles on how neighboring countries are now being connected. In this case, it was the example of the electricity grid. I think this is exactly the right way to think, not only for the EU, but also to think through which of the policies we can open to connect those countries we want to stabilize and we want to actually keep close to the European Union at a moment where we have to assume that even if not militarily, but in hybrid ways, they are also threatened by Russia. And this again goes to the leadership role that Germany has taken for itself. In Olaf Scholz's speech to the German Bundestag, he said very clearly and rightly so, this is not about Ukraine only. It is about freedom and democracy on our continent. And this framing, I think, is the right one. And it's not only the EU again. And Germany, as it is the biggest country, really the richest, and so on, it has to make sure that the EU puts the necessary solidarity mechanisms in place. The issue of migration was mentioned very importantly. Many of them will come to Germany. We have to look at internal distribution and making it work internally within our country. But we also have a very big role to play in making sure the EU as a whole manages the inflow of refugees and manages them in a way that this is sustainable for European society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniela. Let's move back immediately to Brussels and let's go to Susanna Angel. Susanna is a policy analyst in the European Council Oversight Unit, ECOS, in the EPRS, where her research focuses on the European Council and foreign security policy. I think the European Council met 3 times, plus tomorrow, since in various formats, and it's very interesting to see an evolution of the institution around the crisis, because ECO is not only profiling crisis management, but took also a role in anticipating. And I remember there was this meeting at the site of the EU-Africa summit just before the war, where they already prepared for what's going to happen. So it's going to be very interesting to listen to your analysis, Susanna, and I'd like also to highlight the various publications that have come out recently from your unit. Over to you, Susanna.
Thank you very much, Etienne, and good afternoon to our audience. A lot of ground has been already covered by the previous speakers, and I will focus in my intervention on the European Council's response to Russia's war on Ukraine. A response which has to be seen both in terms of initial short-term measures, but also in the long to medium term. On the short term, you're right, Etienne. We see 4 EU leaders meetings in 5 weeks, which means that the European Council is once again operating in a crisis management mode. And in the European Council Oversight Unit in EPRS, we have been studying the behavior of the European Council as a crisis manager. And I believe that our colleagues have already circulated a number of publications you could consult. So the European Council, once again, is operating in a crisis mode at the same pace and as we have observed 2 years ago when the pandemic has started. So basically we have more or less the same number of initial meetings, but we also see a possible change in the behavior of the European Council in the sense that what we have observed in past crises was a European Council which was reacting to the crisis and had little crisis anticipation capacity. Whilst in the case of Ukraine, currently, we see that the European Council has anticipated. And that anticipation took the form of a meeting you have mentioned on the 17th of February, when the EU leaders met a week before the start of the war, and where they agreed on a common position, expressed their unity, not only among themselves, but also with like-minded partners, as it has been highlighted by a number of speakers before. And they, at the same time, they have also agreed on the initial response that the EU is going to follow. And the initial response on 2 pillars, I would argue: support to Ukraine and sanctions towards Russia in case at the time Russia would escalate. In the interim, we have seen that there was this escalation. We all basculated in a different world on the 24th of February with the start of the war. And this initial response of the European Council, we have seen that there is unity which is maintained since, but we have seen also a number of sanctions, different sets of sanctions being installed since. And there is talk for possible more sanctions. But in the interim, the European Council has also moved to shaping a long-term response to the crisis. And this move has been done in Versailles with the adoption of the Versailles Declaration, which several speakers before have pointed has 3 pillars: an economic one, a security and defense one, and also an energy one. It's going to be, to a certain extent, the roadmap and that the EU is going to follow in the next years. But Versailles was equally important in acknowledging that there are the dependencies, that the EU has to become more resilient, and that its sovereignty has to be strengthened. In terms of dependencies and vulnerabilities, the Versailles Declaration mentions food security, a topic which might come to the agenda of the European Council in the months to come. It also mentions semiconductors. The Commission has put forward a communication recently on the European Chip Act. But semiconductors might be something which the EU should closely watch as a Ukrainian crisis and the war in Ukraine continues, because Ukraine has 2 plants of neon gas, which account for around 45% to 54% of the neon gas global market. These plants are currently closed because of the war. And that might put an additional strain on semiconductors, as neon gas is essential for chips. Another aspect in the Declaration of Versailles that I would briefly mention is security and defense. Mr. McAllister has extensively spoken about security and defense. We see this week that ministers have adopted the strategic compass, and there is expectation that the European Council will endorse the strategic compass, which to a certain extent gives a vision for the years to come. But this vision has to be sustained by means. And there is a political momentum currently to increase defense spending, and this is understandable. But that spending has, to a certain extent, it needs to be coordinated. And in order to ensure that there is maximum value for money spent in defense, and as part of the strategic compass, there are going to be new financing solutions which are going to be explored at the Horizon 2023. And in her intervention to the European Council 2 weeks ago, President Metsola said that the budgetary means of the EU would have to be further explored in order to contribute to strengthening security and defense. I will last mention a couple of things about energy. Mr. McAllister has spoken of a paradigm shift. I think this paradigm shift definitely applies to energy. Back in 2014, when Crimea has been illegally annexed by Russia, the European Council has focused on energy And reducing energy dependency was among the commitments which have been undertaken at the time, along with another commitment to maintain prices at reasonable levels. And it was the later element that has prevailed, as we have seen more of an economic turned energy policy rather than of an energy security aspect of the energy policy, which can be further strengthened and enhanced currently, as there is wide political consensus of reducing gas dependency from Russia. So I will stop here, but in a nutshell, the long-term perspective is about strengthening the resilience of the EU, making it less dependent, and also strengthening its capacity to act autonomously.
Thank you very much, Susanna, and for this presentation, and thank you for exploring the Versailles agenda and Versailles roadmap and the various chapters that are quite detailed and operational, and we expect them to lead to strategic autonomy and or to European sovereignty, as sometimes highlighted. And there is an internal and an external dimension to this, and I'm sure that our next speaker would react on these two aspects. It's Jakob from Kierkegaard. Jakob is Senior Fellow at the German Marshall Fund, GMF, in Brussels, and non-resident Senior Fellow of the Peterson Institute for International Economics in Washington, where he worked for many years. He previously served in the Danish Ministry of Defense and UN in Iraq, as well as working in financial services. I'd like also to mention two books: Transatlantic Economic Challenges in an Era of Growing Multipolarity, 2012, and The Accelerating Decline in America's High-Skilled Workforce, 2007. Over to you, Jakob.
Thank you very much, Etienne. Thank you for inviting me. I'm going to basically shape my remarks into four parts. The first concerns China. Secondly, I want to talk and discuss a little bit about the reasons for President Biden coming to, again, Brussels, of course, later this week. Then I want to discuss some of the, in my opinion, truly significant strategic decisions that the EU is about to potentially take. And then finally, I want to discuss the fact that there are, I think, pretty significant fiscal implications of all of the things we're talking about here, but that these are actually not, and I think this was also the gist of some of the things that both Daniela and Susanna said, they're not being fully acknowledged by the EU Council, at least not yet. But first of all, a little bit on the role of China here. I think it's important to recognize that there really is this important external factor in the imposition of sanctions against Russia. Here, I will focus predominantly on the technology sanctions and the financial sanctions. Because yes, the EU has reacted with unprecedented speed, but I think it's actually, in respect to China, more important that this is not, as has been mentioned by others also, this is not just an EU-US thing. This is technology sanctions by the G7, including other advanced manufacturing companies in Asia, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, etc. So I think it's fair to say that we're starting to see the first, if you like, contours of at least the major advanced democracies standing together, in this case, against the war of aggression and autocracy. And I think this is actually a pretty important signal also for China, because there are, as we know, two major autocratic countries in the world, namely Russia, but also China. So we are now in a situation where I think it's fair to say that Russia is unlikely to be able to import virtually any manufactured good that it needs directly for its war effort. I mean, we saw reported, I think yesterday, that Russia's only tank plant has actually shut down because of a lack of spare parts. and it certainly won't be able to import advanced microchips because of the comprehensive nature of the countries that have joined, unless, of course, these chips and other parts come from China. To some extent, the situation, I think, is the same, focusing on the financial sanctions. I think we need to be honest in Europe that the SWIFT sanctions, but also the sanctions that often are talked about targeting the Russian central bank, are incomplete in nature. There are large Russian banks that are not targeted or de-SWIFted, as it's called now. This is by design. And what we have seen is in recent days that this has allowed the ruble to actually strengthen. So that the ongoing inflow of foreign exchange reserves or foreign exchange to Russia because of energy sales is actually, the Russian central bank is able to deploy them in the markets. So what this does, of course, is that it limits the possibility or risk of, depending on your point of view, of hyperinflation in Russia, at least in the short run. But again, we should be honest with ourselves. This is because of the design of the sanctions that not least Europe has pressed for. On the other hand, I think the good news vis-a-vis China here is that all the major reserve currency countries are part of the sanctions to block Russia's existing foreign exchange reserves. And I think, as China considers its strategic options in the future, this will matter. Because China, of course, has, $3 trillion or so of foreign exchange reserves. And it has an economy where, because of slowing real estate market, declining population, etc., domestic demand is slowing. So it may very well be continuing to rely more and more on export and building further foreign exchange reserves in the process. But the reality is that if you are a would-be aggressor, and I mean, here we are, of course, talking about China refusing to rule out a potential invasion in the future of Taiwan, it is a bad idea to rely on export growth and build this big war chest, because when all the reserve currencies of the world are likely to join sanctions against you. In fact, what we have seen in Russia is that what this will do, it may not stop the war effort. It hasn't done, obviously, in Russia, but it certainly has given us $300 billion or so in frozen assets that I certainly believe and hope will ultimately be channeled not back to Russia, but towards the reconstruction and the rebuilding of Ukraine, of course. So again, I think the broad geographic scope of sanctions vis-a-vis Russia is really important in the strategic thinking of China. At the same time, I think it's very clear that politically, President Xi sees Putin as an ally, first and foremost, against the United States. I don't think China expected an invasion to happen, because I think it's pretty clear that you had thousands of Chinese stranded in Ukraine. And they certainly didn't expect Russia to probably lose, or at least have a stalemate in this war, and ultimately end up being an impoverished pariah internationally. But at the same time, from President Xi's point of view, it is difficult politically to cut off Russia, because it implies basically doing what the US wants. So I don't think we should expect, therefore, politically, that China does that. At the same time, I think we're seeing it on the ground. Chinese companies face essentially the same logic commercially that European companies that were targeted by American sanctions on Iran, namely that you want to continue to trade in Iran, you lose access to the US market. This is true also for Chinese companies. You want to keep doing business and send potentially sanctioned goods and services to China, you're going to lose access to all the advanced economies in the world. This will mean that most Chinese companies are not going to help Russia do this. They're not going to help Russia evade sanctions because it will be commercially, not very rational to do so. That doesn't mean that some Chinese state-owned enterprises will not be ordered by the Chinese government to do so, but certainly the large and most technologically savvy Chinese companies, in my opinion, will not do so. And that's what we have seen, in fact, to date. So ultimately, I think China is going to keep buying a lot of commodities from Russia, oil, gas, wheat, etc. But let's be honest, that's exactly what Europe has chosen to do. So if we're going to point the finger at China for doing this in an opportunistic manner, we should also be pointing the finger at Chancellor Scholz and Prime Minister Rutte and the other EU leaders who basically have refused those types of more comprehensive sanction on Russia as well. So shifting to what is Joe Biden's desire when he comes here. Well, obviously, Joe Biden, again, the strategic rival for the United States remains China. So from that point of view, the Russian invasion in Ukraine offers the United States, in my opinion, a good opportunity to strengthen the transatlantic relationship, first against Russia, of course, but also maybe also against China. I think you have already seen, you're going to have a clear Biden endorsement of an EU defense dimension. And we're going to have a whole host of new meetings, and I think Susanna also mentioned it in the Trade and Technology Council, focused on technology, export controls, etc. First and foremost, of course, against Russia, but also maybe in the long run against also China. But I think there is one more big ask from Joe Biden, which is essentially energy sanctions by the EU, because geostrategically, externally, Western resolve vis-a-vis Russia is ultimately proven by our willingness to bear the economic costs and hardship against aggression elsewhere in the world. Right now, it's Ukraine. But ultimately, importantly, in the future, vis-a-vis China for the United States, it's about Taiwan. And the most important strategic signal, therefore, that Europe could send about the dangers of a strategic, a Chinese potential invasion of Taiwan, is to be willing to bear significant economic costs because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which of course basically means joining at least the oil embargo against Russia, precisely because it will cost us something. It is a signal to China that matters. And it is, in my opinion, the best option to make perhaps China rethink its strategic options on Taiwan, because ultimately Beijing knows very well that the economic exposure of Germany in China is infinitely higher than it is in Russia. So why should China be afraid of international sanctions if it could just turn around and tell Berlin, oh, those are nice BMW sales you have there, shame if something were to happen to them. So unless we're willing to bear economic costs against Russia, the conclusion from China that China will draw is we're not going to be serious either about the sanctions against China because of a potential invasion of Taiwan, because the economic costs we're going to suffer from that are going to be much higher than vis-a-vis Russia, which is precisely why Joe Biden is going to be asking for this. And to be honest, as has been mentioned, so far the EU Council has not been willing to articulate, in my opinion, an adequate response to this request. Then finally, moving on to the strategic decisions of the EU. We've talked a lot about, a defense union, the strategic compass. I think these are all good things. I strongly applaud them. It's building the EU long-term capacity. But I will still say that the most strategically important geopolitical external thing that the EU can do right now is to accept the potential, basically allow Ukraine to begin membership talks to join the EU. Everyone knows that it will take a decade. We're talking probably the mid-2030s here. But by doing so, the EU will inject itself very directly into the sort of Russia geopolitical question, because it's very clear that Russia's demand for a neutral Ukraine would probably not mean that it wouldn't accept neutrality. Russia's demand for neutrality would not allow Ukraine to join the EU. But I guess I would contend that since the biggest two sources of reconstruction funds for Ukraine will invariably be Russia's frozen foreign exchange reserves, as well as funds from the EU, I personally think that this is the best political signal that the EU can send if it really wants to be a serious geopolitical player. Then finally, a little bit about the fiscal implications of all of this. I mean, I applaud everything that David McAllister said against a prospective defense union, etc. But I think we just need to recognize that when the EU takes decisions to inject itself more directly into an ongoing war, that's what we have seen with the peace facility, etc. It's obviously what we have seen with the opening up of borders for refugees, and I actually applaud the Commission for today proposing 3.4 billion from the REACT EU funds, pre-funded to member states. I think it's a good proposal, but I think we should be honest with ourselves. What this does is it spends existing money that we appropriated during Next Generation EU towards new challenges arising from the war. And what this will do one way or another is it will cannibalize existing priorities, whether it's COVID, whether it's decarbonization, whether it's cohesion and general economic development, which is what these funds were actually earmarked for. So the reality is, and then we have this whole issue of the rule of law vis-a-vis frontline states on the refugee issue, Poland and Hungary. How do we actually enforce that? Or maybe we don't. But the point is, we cannot seriously believe that the EU is going to be a more geopolitical actor or a more sovereign actor unless we take the fiscal implications of this. Being a more direct player in a war is expensive. Weaning ourselves off energy dependence from Russia is expensive. And basically, a truly sovereign entity, therefore, is one that can go into debt to help deal with an unforeseen crisis. This is the core of what sovereignty ultimately means. And unless EU leaders are willing to go down that route, we just have to conclude that they're actually, in my opinion, not truly serious about the EU being a truly geopolitical actor or strategic autonomy or whatever we call it. And certainly the EU Defense Union is going to be similar to the Capital Markets Union, a great concept if it could be implemented. But without a serious fiscal capacity, the Defense Union is going to be plans, a paper tiger that cannot be implemented and make a difference. And to those people who say, oh, but that's all what NATO is here for, that's true. But think just once about what the Western response to the crisis in Russia would have been if President Trump had been in office, or some other potential Republican president right now. I think it's pretty clear that we will be in a different world, and it would behoove the EU Council to think seriously about that ahead of time. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jakob, for this presentation and for the thought-provoking ideas, and also for making the links between geopolitics and internal policies of the Union. Let's keep this question of energy, and let's dig in the contingency measures and also the long-term planning, because these two aspects were highlighted in the Versailles agenda. I'd like to hand over to Lasse. Lasse Böhm is head of our economic policies unit in the EPRS, and is responsible for macroeconomic and energy issues. He has worked on Green Deal, Energy Union, and Economic and Monetary Union issues for many years, having started in the Parliament in 2004. So, Lasse, what's your assessment? Are we now closer to something that we could call an energy union with the crisis?
Thank you, Etienne. I'm really glad for Jacob's very hawkish view there, which I'd like to sort of take up and continue in the area of energy. Jacob, what you did, and I share your view, is you looked underneath the carpet, and it's a pretty big carpet, and there are a lot of things underneath there. And I share your view about the debt, and that also applies, of course, to energy, because the question is what we do enough? And when you tackle that question, in any domain, but also in particular in energy, you need to look at the strategy you like to pursue, but also the facts. Now, looking at the strategy, is what we do enough in the field of energy? Well, I don't think so, because we don't know what Mr. Putin will do. He might cut us off from gas, who knows, or at least partially, or for a couple of days, just to sow discord in November, and then turn the taps back on. So that's the sort of strategic view. And in terms of facts, I mean, the Commission says that gas storage, even if you fill it up to the maximum, in a normal winter will deliver about 30% of gas demand. 30%. Now, we welcome, of course, I think everyone does, and there will be an agreement pretty quickly, I'm sure, in the Parliament as well on this. We welcome the Commission proposal today on the obligatory gas storage, which in brackets, of course, is something that we should have done years ago. But by the way, talking about this, the Commission today proposed an 80% target for gas storage. Some observers hoped for 90% one. They propose a 90% one for next year, but next year is next year. Next year is after the next winter. So is what we do enough? I don't think so. And here I'm fully with Jacob. I think we need to do two things. Firstly, we need to look at energy as a real European public good. There are two elements here. The first one is that member states have vastly different capacities for gas storage. Gas storage is essentially only a significant factor in 5 bigger member states, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, etc. So uneven gas storage. The second element is uneven liquefied natural gas infrastructure and capability. So LNG gas, that's gas being shipped from Qatar, for example, or from the United States, coming in not via pipelines, but via ships. Which can substitute for some of the potential gas shortfalls from Russia in case either we turn off the taps or Mr. Putin turns off the taps. So, but again, there's sort of an uneven distribution of infrastructure. So I think we need to tackle and address this, and we can only do so from a European level. And by the way, in terms of the EU treaties, the energy mix is a national competence, but security of energy supply is a joint competence and has always been a joint competence. And if you allow me another remark, I'm a little bit ashamed to say it, a little bit embarrassed because it's so banal. Look at the history of our institution, of this parliament, and more so the Commission, which ultimately, I mean, historically grew out of the European coal and steel community. So it was a single market which was the add-on. We started as an energy union because whoever controls energy controls the mode of production, controls the economy as a whole. And that, Etienne, is a little bit sort of the answer that I want to give. Allow me to make 2 specific points. We do need, so I talked about, gas storage not being enough to get us through the winter, even if we manage to fill up gas storage to the absolute maximum. So, and the Commission itself also says so. And I think there have been, most viewers will be familiar with some of the think tank studies which came out in the last couple of weeks, which delve into some of the figures in greater detail. So it's pretty clear that we need to get a strategy into place, but with an executive capability. So with the capability to act on energy efficiency, so reducing consumption, firstly, and secondly, ramping up renewable, and we need to do so fast. Now, of course, there is a legislative framework. We already have legislation on energy efficiency and on renewable agency, as well as on infrastructure funding. That legislation, those 3 pieces of legislation are also currently undergoing revision. But of course, what we don't have is a short-term executive capacity to really, really increase these rapidly to make up for basically what's left between, the gas storage and the ultimate needs. And I think that's what we need to do. So we need to get into an executive crisis mode. This, to me, requires 2 things. It requires money. Allow me to point out the parallel to the Recovery and Resilience Facility, just because this keeps on appearing in the current debates, and a lot of think tanks have taken this up. So the question of whether we should use or repurpose some of the money in the EU's recovery funds. Yes, you can do so, but the big question here, and that's different to the pandemic recovery, is the big question when we talk about energy is it's not only about the amount of money you spend. So it's not only about the quantity, it's also about the quality of spending, is what you actually spend the money on. And here there's a big question mark as to the potential use of the Recovery and Resilience Facility, apart from the fact that most of that money has already been budgeted, at least not necessarily spent, but budgeted. But the difference is to current needs, which I just sketched out, is that when we discussed the RRF, or when the Brussels system bubble discussed and ultimately agreed on the Recovery and Resilience Facility in 2020 to combat the pandemic slump, it was literally only about the numbers. And ultimately, and with a few sort of caveats, and I'm grossly simplifying here, of course, it's up to member states to decide how to spend the recovery money. But that's exactly not what we need here. We do need a lot of money, but we need to put it to very particular use. And the particular use is, heat pump, it's solar panels, and it's specific measures to save energy. And so money is one thing, and the second thing is the governance structure of what I just sketched out, this sort of cooperation mechanism. Imagine for a second the scenario whereby country A, which has a lot of gas storage, fills this gas storage up to the maximum at high price, possibly subsidizing gas suppliers or taking over some of the costs to fill that gas storage, and at the same time implementing ambitious energy savings targets throughout the summer and into autumn this year. And then imagine country B, which might not have a gas storage, because that's usually, sort of cavernous underground storage. You can't just build it, basically. Country B doesn't have gas storage and doesn't save as much energy as country A, but then in November asks country A to deliver gas. So that's why, we will get us into huge trouble if we don't sort out or if you don't establish a coordinating mechanism with clear targets and a funding capacity for energy efficiency and renewables, because that is not a discussion we would like to have in November, because it would hugely divide the EU. And the second discussion, of course, we would not like to have in November is the one about the social compensation, which a number of speakers pointed to, and in particular Daniela Schwarzer. People spending €2 a litre on petrol, it's very different if you're on a Bulgarian salary or on a Danish salary. And that is the basic question. And this discussion will come. And I think that probably hasn't sunk in yet. I mean, it's there at national level, but I'm talking about the EU level and Brussels, of course. This discussion will come. The question is, will we have this discussion now in a calm setting, with the rest of the framework on energy, at least, that I just sketched out, or will we have it in a panic mode in October and November? I certainly don't hope we will have this discussion in October or November. I hope that we will be able to tackle these difficult questions. I think we will, because, mind you all, a couple of weeks or so early into 2020, before the pandemic, no one would have thought that we would have, or the EU would agree to what ultimately became the Next Generation EU and the Recovery and Resilience Facility. So I think it's all there, but it needs to be tackled, and the window is closing because the next winter is coming soon. And I'll leave it at that, but I'm happy to answer more questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lasse, for getting very concrete about the challenges we have in the energy sector. Daniela has to leave us at 2 o'clock sharp because she has a call with Ukraine. And therefore, I would like, before moving to Elena, just take a question for Daniela. And it's about, you raised the question of public opinion and public support to the urgent measures that have had to be taken to face the crisis, and also the public support for the refugees and so on. But there is also a more long-term issue. Do you see emerging a stronger support for the EU as such and the EU project as such? We can see I saw a survey quite striking about the upcoming referendum in Denmark in June. As you know, the main parties in Denmark agreed on a package which is increased military spending, which is abolish the opt-out clause, which is opt-in in a way to the EU defense, and there was a 2/3 support. Is it something that you see as being something ephemeral, or is it something that is going to be much stronger in the future? What's your assessment on the EU, the public support for the EU integration as a result of the crisis?
War has definitely changed the threat perception across the European Union. I mean, it's obviously still not the same everywhere. Over years, we could observe, and in particular after the annexation of Crimea and the start of the war in eastern Ukraine, that the perception of Russia as a threat was strongest in the Baltic states, Poland, and other countries, in the east and central European geography. Actually, interestingly, steps of European integration, even if they were of an economic nature, were by some countries framed then as a strategic interest, also relating to security concerns. Take, for instance, the moment Baltic countries decided to join the euro. This wasn't just because the euro is a great currency. Actually, it was just after the sovereign debt and banking crisis, and still we were struggling with the effects thereof. But they, by definition, you know, joined the donor side of the rescue mechanisms that were put in place then, because they had to fulfill the convergence criteria, but they did it because deeper integration promised more protection. And I think we are facing something similar at the moment, that there is a realization that Europe means a lot. And here, obviously, the aspect of Europe as a security provider is gaining importance. But secondly, there's also this understanding that Europe defends a certain, or the EU defends a certain model of liberal democracy that we cherish. And so what I said earlier on about the framing of the conflict going well beyond Ukraine in its importance, I think this is a feeling that is shared and that spreads. I see, you know, when I look at social media, also media commentary in the sort of mainstream established media, I think we right now witness a moment where people cherish the model that we have built in post-war Europe, because suddenly there is a sense that this is actually not to be taken for granted. And that creates a particular momentum where steps of deeper integration can well be argued. Now, but in the short term, I think I would fully support what Lasse has said. Right now, the costs of the conflict and of its repercussions are not fully felt by citizens. And we have to prepare for the moment where they will be fully felt, and they are not evenly distributed within societies and not between societies. And this is where I see the risk, although there is a there is a deeper understanding of what integration into the EU means and that it needs to be strengthened. There is also a risk that at the same time, when the costs are fully felt, we lose that momentum, and it will be very difficult to put in place mechanisms that at least partially compensate the uneven distribution of costs. And so this debate, I fully go along with Lasse, who argued the case for energy. I think the other case to be argued is migration. We have to consider dealing with those issues a joint European task. And we have to acknowledge that we have to provide European public goods, and energy you framed as one of them. I agree. I think security in a very broad sense is really becoming one as well, that people understand, you know, every single member state can do this and that in defense and hybrid defense and whatever, but the EU has something very important to add. And it's really this internal consolidation and deepening, not only by more integration to give us the tools we need to secure our own future, but also this sense of unity and sense of European identity is something that politically needs to be worked on, because Europe has to be made a stronger external actor. And this requires very strong political leadership. As you know, all speakers have said, everyone has spoken about rapid progress over the past weeks. This is really very different to what we saw when Russia annexed Crimea and started the war in Ukraine's east. Of course, the war now is of a very, very different brutality. However, I think the EU has also understood, and the member state governments, that they really have to react quickly and have to lead on steps that are in the future to be completed, because the whole world has changed. I mean, it's not only Russia. When we look at China, when we look at the perspective of transatlantic relations post-Biden, I think the narrative was never as strong as it is now for a stronger Europe. But public opinion needs to be constantly supported in the sort of positive momentum that we have at the moment by giving a clear vision and explaining very clearly why we need to do certain steps, and even if they seem costly, they are the right ones, because non-action would have a much higher price for European citizens. And my apologies that I have to leave you in a few minutes. I'm really sorry. I really enjoy this debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniela, for this answer, but also for having be able to be with us today. Let's move now to our last speaker among the panelists, who is Elena Lazarou. Elena is acting head of the External Policies Unit in the Members Research Service at EPRS. She previously also headed the Center for International Relations at the Vargas Foundation in Brazil, and she has various roles in think tanks and universities in Europe and in the US. So over to you, Elena, to comment this discussion.
Thank you very much, Etienne, and thank you also as part of EPRS to all the speakers for joining us for this debate, and my colleagues, and to the audience. I'm the last speaker, and in many ways I had two privileges. One is, as the last speaker, you can sort of choose what you can mention that has not been mentioned, but also being involved in the organization, I also had foreseen this. So what I thought I would do is talk a bit about geopolitical trends and the EU's response to this crisis in terms of where its security and defense policy is going. And actually, where Daniela left off, it's a shame that she had to go, but really is a good starting point, because European public opinion only started to support the idea of increased defense spending, more or less at the time when Russia annexed Crimea. We previously had a severe economic and financial crisis. Also before that had been enjoying to a large extent the sort of so-called peace dividend. So really, when we look at since when has European public opinion supported more spending on this area, it's been really related to Russia. And Russia brings it to the fore again in many ways, since under the COVID crisis, again, we saw a slump in European public opinion on the support for defense spending. And of course, now a sudden reversal that is unquestionable has emerged. So, of course, this is a big week for EU security and defense. It had been foreseen to be such a week, actually, before Russia's invasion. Charles Michel had said this would be, and I think Susanna alluded to it, the year of defense, because this is the week when the European Council was expected to and is very likely to adopt the strategic compass, the product of a work ongoing among member states under the guidance of the External Action Service for 2 years, and I would add a bit more since its conception, to really look at where EU security and defense policy is going by 2030, to build a sense of strategic culture in the various definitions of what that means, including shared assessment of threats and shared goals, and really to sort of mold the EU defense identity looking forward based on the EU's treaty and actually based on several calls from the European Parliament much earlier on. So this has turned to be that week, I think, but in many different ways, because no one expected that we would be facing an actual war in Europe at this stage, not in the EU, but outside, but in its borders. And that has had two effects. I think the first effect has been our way of thinking globally about geopolitics, and this has been alluded to, has changed rapidly and significantly. And in a moment, I'll get into why I think that will has affected the compass in the future. And the second, the content of the compass itself, which has been seriously redrafted in the past few weeks. And that will be my sort of second group of comments. On the first group, I think the trends that many of you have commented on and which are being commented on by experts around the world have shown the EU that we've been looking at the right direction all this time, thinking of the compass and the way forward, but maybe we have not been going at the right pace. So a lot of the trends that are now coming to explosive results have been those that have been identified by the EU's foresight work, by the prep work on the strategic compass, but still we don't have all the answers to that. And I just want to mention a few of those. The return of great power politics, a great cliche, but in fact, now we know with there's been an open question. Would this play out on the geo-economic front? Would this play out on the geotechnological front? And now it seems it will play out on all those fronts, but also on the conventional front. And that's very important in defense policy, because it means alongside the spectrum of new capabilities that are being talked about to face emerging threats, conventional capabilities and conventional warfare are here to be a part of the environment, and that's to be taken into consideration in the EU's plans going ahead. A second trend that has been watched, but again comes to, as I said, an explosive sort of moment of having to think about it, is multilateralism. And I say this not only in terms of multilateralism on the security front, so the United Nations and NATO, but also the capacity of rules to sort of control the events on the global stage. And we've seen this in many ways in the way this crisis has been in various ways taken to the ICJ, to the ICC, International Criminal Court, International Court of Justice. Also Russia's withdrawal from various multilateral institutions, which actually makes it more difficult to have a rules-based relationship with that. So we are not in an anarchic world, I would say. In an anarchic world, this war would be run by Russia in a minute, because let's not forget that Russia's defense budget is approximately half the GDP of Ukraine. So that would be what would happen in a sort of realist anarchic world. But definitely the rules are being questioned, including by the third trend, which is this great divide between the influence of democracy and the influence of authoritarianism. And it's been mentioned here, of course, that the majority of states supported the General Assembly resolution on Russia, but 35 states abstained. And if one looks at what these states are, they are those where there is big Chinese and Russian influence, China itself included. So that is something we have to keep in mind. And then, of course, the various trends that have been alluded to: energy transition, regulation of technology and digital technologies that can become weaponized. All these are coming to the fore in this war, and their interlinkages with defense policy are ever more evident than before. Suffice it to say, Susanna has mentioned already the energy requirements for any type of production of defense capabilities. But we should also not forget that lithium, for example, and other rare earths and raw materials, which are necessary for the building of defense capabilities, are also the ones that are necessary for computers, for digital products that we use every day, the demand of which is foreseen to rise by about twofold by 2050 or so. So what we're seeing is essentially we will need even more lithium in Europe and in the US and in the Western world, and China continues to produce 60% or more than that of the world reserves. So we still have a lot of these trends which we knew, we foresaw, the responses are on the table, but they need to be put into practice. And all this applies to security and defense. And here's my second point. It does really merge into place with the strategic compass. Anyone who's been following this process, among the whole sadness of what we were experiencing, had probably did have a moment of saying, we did get it right, and don't mean myself, but the people in the External Action Service and the member states, because everything that is involved in this war is there on paper. I would argue a lot of it is now becoming practice as well, and the swift activation of the peace facility to 1 billion euros of military support to Ukraine. That's on top of 2 billion by the United States, by the way. So it's actually 3 billion euros of military assistance transatlantic, and that's a big proportion of Ukraine's defense budget. So we're seeing things happen, and we're seeing that the areas towards which the EU is looking for the future of its security and defense policy are quite astutely thought of. And of course, the devil is in the implementation, in the details. But here I'd like to sort of draw and finish there on the various aspects of the baskets, of the so-called baskets of the compass. And just to a few elements in each. It's a 47-page document, very much worth reading, by the way. Now refers to Russia 20 times as opposed to some weeks ago. So there's clearly been a lot of rewriting. But a few things in each basket that I think are worth mentioning in the context of how this war has affected EU security and defense policy. On the basket to do with acting and crisis management, the reinforcement of the common security and defense policy missions is now very much linked, I find, in text and subtext to the fact that The EU's common security and defense policy is active in theaters where Russia is also active, including the Sahel. So it really should be reinforced in all ways, including resilience to the threats that will emerge from this crisis even stronger, such as the cyber threat, the food and poverty related to the food crisis threat, which will cause more conflict in other theaters. And of course, the financial solidarity needed by EU member states to support acting through peace facility and other financing of operations. In the investment basket, which is to do with capabilities, I think the focus remains, of course, as was planned to, on next generation capabilities, but also hybrid response capabilities, cyber and resilience, foreign interference. But this has been all the more got the stamp now that it is needed because of the Russia war. The resilience sort of securing basket of the compass is very interesting to watch in the sense in which it has had the aspect of cooperating on situational awareness, intelligence sharing, and foresight. And that is largely to do with the anticipation capacity of the Union when it comes to such situations. Number of initiatives that we are writing about in EPRS, so I won't tire the audience, but we will be writing about all this and have been the satellite center, single intelligence analysis capacity. But most importantly, and finally, the partnership basket. And that one is the one most linked to geopolitics, because after all, geopolitics are about alliances, partnerships, and linkages between states. And I think there, one thing that emerges very clearly in the compass and that we may be seeing in the next days with President Biden here is a real reinforcement of the transatlantic alliance, a reduction of any doubts about the necessity for both the EU and NATO to be active, because now it's not just about defense, but it's also about various types of deterrence and about other ways of resilience. And I think we'll be seeing that in the coming days in NATO, in the G7, and even in President Trudeau's, Prime Minister Trudeau's address to Parliament today. The extension of the idea, the plan to have tailored bilateral partnerships, including with the UK, which is now very clearly there in the compass. And the foreign policy as a whole to be linked to security and defense policy, because it's only through foreign policy that partners, including in the Eastern neighborhood, which is something that the EU will be looking closely at, those in the Western Balkans, those in Africa, the OSCE, can be engaged in such a way as to provide support for defense and security. So more than ever, I think, and that will help the EU's tools to be even more relevant, foreign policy and security and defense policy are becoming interlinked. And I finish here by saying, of course, all this requires financing, just to echo all the other speakers, but I guess that is for another event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena. Thank you very much to all speakers. We have covered really a lot of ground. We have about 20 minutes for the discussion. I would like to mention two things before moving to the discussion. First, we had also invited Nathalie Loiseau for making comments to this event, but she couldn't make it as we know it's an extremely busy week, but I wanted to mention it. And the second thing, that we have an audience that is still over 200, and we have also people in Ukraine participating to the event remotely, and I think it's a very nice and encouraging sign to have them. What you said about the transatlantic relation, Elena, it's also commented in the chat. It is said that the two blocs have never been politically so aligned as they are now. There are mentions of the enlargement of NATO. And one specific question is, will Sweden and Finland shift towards NATO be as ephemeral as Iceland's post-2018 crisis wish to join the EU? So how long lasting it is, this change among these countries? And also I would like to add the question about the role sharing between the two blocs, namely on the question of defense clause, article 42.7. How do you see these the two blocs having sharing this responsibility? There is also, I understand that there is quite an interesting breaking news concerning gas that is coming, and I think that Jakob will comment on it, so that would be in the first round. And then I will move to another question, and maybe Lasse, you can already prepare for this. It's a question on shale gas. how much it's possibly an alternative, or LNG, liquid gas, as part of the solution. It's a bit of a technical question, but I think it could be interesting in our debate today. So we want to comment on EU versus NATO, and also on this question of the gas supply on this new. I think you maybe Jakob first.
Well, thank you, Etienne. No, I mean on the expansion of EU, NATO, etc. As I said, I've already mentioned that I think it would be in the EU's strategic interest to at least start negotiations with Ukraine. We have now, in the case of Finland at least, we have 3 or 4 polls that suggests 2/3 majority in favor, which is basically a massive shift. There's 1/3 of the entire voting population that have shifted basically from being opposed to being in favor. Given the long-lasting, standing and aggressiveness of Russia and 1,000 kilometers of borders, I would suspect that at least in Finland, that this public support would continue, and that we would probably see a political decision in Finland relatively soon. What happens in Sweden, I think, is more uncertain. Because you have an incredibly weak government right now. You have a new election coming up, and you have a social, basically Andersson, the prime minister, is going to have to look for, a coalition allies among far left parties in Sweden that may oppose this. So I think the situation in Sweden is somewhat more unclear. And then very quickly, I just want to mention that there was just some breaking news while this event went on, which is really fascinating, namely that Vladimir Putin from now on will demand from quote-unquote hostile countries, that of course means all the countries that are sanctioning Russia, including the EU, that gas purchases are paid in rubles. Which is basically going to force Germany and everybody else in the EU into going into the foreign exchange market and buy the Russian currency, propping it up going forward in order to continue gas. So what Putin has just done is, in my opinion at least, hopefully, he has very significantly increased the political pain for not least Chancellor Scholz and others to continue gas purchases from Russia, because he basically probably read Chancellor Scholz's speech from earlier today in the Bundestag when he said, Germany is never going to block energy purchases because it's too painful. Well, if that's the case, then it is risk-free for Vladimir Putin to do what he has done, and basically a potentially very significant help in propping off the ruble, and certainly explicitly undermining the effect of many of the financial sanctions that have until now been imposed on Russia. So it really tells you a little bit, in my opinion, about the lack of strategic foresight by Chancellor Scholz's unambiguous rejection of energy sanctions against Russia. He's going to have to pay a significant political price for that stance. So thanks to Mr. Putin today. Thank you.
Who wants to comment on EU-NATO? Elena, maybe?
Yes, of course, although now I have a lot of questions for Jakob, including a lot of financial related issues and whether this is a result of China's actions yesterday, which told companies to facilitate Russian business. But just to go back to NATO, there were a few questions there. I do not have the crystal ball to foresee how long the Swedish-Finnish appetite to join NATO. And having said that, also the Danish intention to have a referendum to join the CSDP as a full part of it will last. But I have to say that in my understanding, there are two things that make that very different from the Icelandic case back during the financial crisis. One is that this, for those states, is a way, particularly for Finland and Sweden, to assert their sovereignty of making decisions, because it's really in response to Putin having made proposals for a security architecture which will limit their ability to make that sovereign decision of who are their allies. And that's very different from the Icelandic case. And the second important thing is that both Denmark in the CSDP and Finland and Sweden in NATO already work very closely with those frameworks. So Finland and Sweden are very important partners of NATO. Sweden is a really significant partner of NATO in many ways. And Denmark has already contributed to the non-military implication part of the European Peace Facility. So there is a lot of interlinkage there. So it's not out of the blue. So this may last longer. And this is also reinforced by the point to the first question, which is, as I said, and I think will become even clearer, the sort of doubts about the compatibility of EU membership and membership of an EU defense mechanism and NATO is becoming less and less disputed. I mean, Josep Borrell yesterday in his hearing in Parliament said he had become bored of responding to this question because it's so clear in all the documents that it has all been designed so a state can be part of the EU and part of NATO and not find an incompatibility there in its defense policy. So I think as that and NATO-EU cooperation becomes even more strong, then it will be less of a dilemma. There is the anticipation of a third EU-NATO joint declaration that may or may not materialize this summer, which will also go more into the emerging and disruptive tech threats and in the sharing of intelligence, which is really a critical issue. And we'll see what happens. But indeed, US-EU relations are at a great point. And part of that, and I'll finish here, that trend I mentioned of the changing geopolitical environment is that all the great powers are reconsidering their security policy. And the US is also, I would say, re-emerging as a different actor in security and foreign policy. After Trump, yes, but also if one looks at the history of US foreign policy, isolationism, globalism, and various phases, now this phase seems to be one of transatlanticism and democratism, if one might call it that way. So in that context, the EU is a very important partner. And by the way, today, some media were reporting thoughts to reopen the discussions on a trade agreement between the EU and the US, so TTIP 2, which just the media, but one never knows.
Elena, last comment on LNG.
Yeah, on LNG, I mean, it's very clear that we need LNG gas to get us over this very, very difficult period. So that I think no one would dispute. There are a number of questions though. The first one is the one about infrastructure and the costs associated with it. Europe already has significant LNG capacities, but they are unevenly distributed. The biggest infrastructure is in Spain, but there are hardly any pipeline connections to the rest of Europe, i.e. France, and then onwards into northern and central Eastern Europe. So that's the big problem of LNG. So if at the current level, basically we can't use all LNG capacities we have for the EU as a whole. Of course, we can use it for individual member states, but we can't use it for the EU as a whole, and we can't simply ship LNG gas arriving by ship into Spain. We can't simply ship that gas, let's say, to Poland or the Czech Republic or Germany for that matter, which is of course the big question mark when it comes to energy policy for the reasons outlined earlier. So LNG is problematic. We know we need more LNG capacity. Interestingly, in Germany, you had the Green Minister of the Economy is signing a memorandum of understanding for building for the first time ever an LNG terminal, which is in the north of Germany, which is something that the German government and in particular the Greens have resisted for a very, very long time. So that is in itself a symbol of the significance of LNG gas. But as I said, for the reasons that it's not just the gas you purchase, but also the infrastructure constraints, there is a limit to LNG gas. Of course, you can invest into infrastructure, you can build those pipelines, but this will take years. We will need to build those pipelines, by the way. I'm not saying we shouldn't. And certainly the interconnector between Spain and France is very high on the list. As is the interconnector, but I think that's pretty much done between Greece and Bulgaria, which is not, excuse me, it's not LNG gas, but it's a pipeline project, infrastructure project, just not to confuse things. On shale gas, now, apart from the sort of economic costs of LNG, because so far it's been quite expensive also to buy LNG because of the infrastructure you need it. You have a lot of environmental costs because, in fact, a lot of the American gas, the gas we purchase from the United States and ship to Europe in the form of liquid natural gas is actually shale gas. So it's gas extracted from rock formations. The gas is essentially being, washed out of the rock with, I'm simplifying here, with water and a chemical liquid which damages the environment. And we saw huge protest movements also in the United States against this. In Europe, you have shale gas fields. In fact, one of the current debate is also about the question whether the Netherlands could not exploit for longer the gas field they have in Groningen. But that's, as I said, controversial also for environmental reasons and for reasons of general public safety, because you have, or you had in the case of the Groningen gas fields, earthquakes actually of minor scale, but certainly leading to some damages to residential areas and therefore huge projects. So LNG has to be part of the solution, but it will cost money, and it will not cover for the entire shortfall that we need to substitute Russian gas with. And shale gas comes with additionally environmental costs.
Right, thank you very much. Then I think Jakob just left or had a connection problem. A question on the next European Council to come, something on possible NGEU2. It has been raised also by the commentators before, but maybe Susanna, you have a view on this, or Lasse?
I can tackle it, but I would like to say a couple of words on the question linked to Article 42.7, not to let it unanswered. We have seen that the Finns and the Swedes have sent a letter ahead of the Versailles summit, where they have put emphasis on solidarity under Article 42.7. Article 42.7, as a consequence, has been referred also in the Versailles Declaration, and is also mentioned in the strategic compass. So to a certain extent, Finland and Sweden are signaling that the importance for them is the EU and the mutual assistance clause, which should be strengthened in the years to come. However, this leaves a number of questions, because there are still lessons to be learned from the first activation of Article 42.7 back in 2015 at the request of France. There are still aspects in the procedure which could be clarified in case of a new activation of this clause. And there, I think that the strategic compass, if I've read it, I've read it rapidly, but if I read it correctly, there is no deadline set for reviewing and considering the procedure linked to Article 42.7, whilst the compass in other aspects is quite detailed, particularly when we consider Article 44. There is a deadline for next year, 2023. So to come back to possible next generation EU and that question, and I will let also Lasse answer this question, but there are still sensitivities among the member states with respect to going beyond what has been agreed for the moment and creating more debt for the EU. This is something that would definitely be have to be considered at the level of the European Council, but as I said, there are a number of sensitivities for the moment.
Thanks a lot. Last, some comment, and Jacob says that his battery just got out of power, so he apologizes for that. Over to you, Lasse, if you want to comment, and then we will reach the end anyway very soon.
The good news is that we're running on a lot of solar power at the moment with so much sunshine. So he's not consuming gas, I presume, at the moment, plugging in his iPhone. On the question of finance slash debt, I mean, if you look at the architecture of the pandemic recovery, so the RRF, which is of course the nearest example that and most recent example that we have, it actually consists of two different pieces of legislation. It consists of the actual RRF regulations, which is the piece of legislation defining what the money should be spent on. And in many ways, that was the easier bit. What was a lot more complicated was what Susanna hinted at, the question of where and how do you raise the money in the first place. So this is the Next Generation EU fund. So the Commission went to financial markets and raised these funds by emitting bonds. This requires unanimity in the European Council. And in fact, what we saw was that it took months to get the own resource decision, as it's called, that's the technical term of the piece of legislation in question, setting up the or allowing for the Next Generation EU fund to emit bonds in financial markets. So it took months for member states to ratify that, because not only does the European Council have to agree to it, but member states need to ratify it individually. And I think that is the key question. So it's a kind of a two-step, well, three-step approach, if you like. The first one is you need the political agreement, then you need to ratify it, and there's a time lag. And for the reasons that I said earlier, time is not what we need, what we have. And thirdly, then you need to once you have that, you need to decide on the spending priorities. And again, sort of this eats into the time budget we don't have. But for reasons outlined earlier, I think we need to tackle that debate. There is a subsection of that debate, if you allow, Etienne, one more thought. The subsection is that we could use the unspent money still in the recovery and resilience facility, of course. So it's 200 billion plus, 220, I think, at the latest count last week. Currently not spent, although some member states have introduced already applications basically for that money, so it would mean reshifting. I think we'll probably do that as a first step, it seems to me. Whether that'll be enough, I'm not sure, because financing the energy transition is a huge task and it is hugely expensive. And 200 billion sounds like a lot of money, but it's not when you're up against that task.
Thank you very much, Lasse. Thank you very much, colleagues. There are still questions coming in. We cannot cover it all in 2 hours. It's extremely large subjects, for example, on democratic oppositions in Russia. What is the hope there that something positive is happening? Also on the question of Taiwan and other questions relating to energy. I would like to thank you all. It's going to be a busy week in the Parliament and in Brussels. As was said before, we have a very interesting presentation this afternoon, very interesting debate this afternoon in the plenary with the address by Prime Minister Trudeau. On the Russian war on Ukraine, I'd like to mention, and on the war itself and on human tragedy linked to it, to draw attention to the numerous publications of the EPRS on military operations, refugees, sanctions, economic consequences, and also on the work on the European Council, as presented by Susanna. I'd like also to mention that as part of a long-time exercise, we also work on risks and shocks and work on policy responses on how we can build a more resilient union. So I encourage you to keep following the work of the EPRS. Finally, the next event is next Wednesday. It's a book talk, The Language of Politics by Niels Ringer, and you can already mark it in your agenda. And finally, thanks to everyone, the speakers, the numerous attendants online, and the ones that helped behind the scene, namely Jacob and Anne-Cécile. Have a great afternoon and see you soon. Bye-bye.